there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak? Anyone else? Ms. Dinger, if you'd go over and get a blue slip, we'd appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay, seeing no other speakers, I'd like to call on our two Chris's over there, our legal counsel and our executive officer, at least to advise us, remind the council again, the timeline and the procedures from this point.
Sure, I'd be happy.
Mr. Stevens.
Is this on now? Can you hear me? Thank
Yes.
you, Mr. Chair. First, I just wanted to ask you to call on any speakers that had filled out the gold cards that were completely satisfied with the rulemaking package. Did you call on all those speakers? So I guess we didn't have
Isn't it illegal for a lawyer to have a sense of humor?
Well, that's very debatable whether I have one.
Keep it under control there,
Okay.
Mr. Stevens.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is, having helped to put this hearing together, thank you to the council for holding this hearing, as well as the hearing that we had previously that was suggested by...
That was a good idea.
Yeah, that was a great idea. And also thank you to all the people in the audience that showed up. I mean, it's very heartening to hear the comments. I'm just a staff lawyer that's trying to do the people's business, but it is very heartening, especially for the people that aren't paid to be here. And so thank you for coming and the good comments. So having said that, the process going forward, as of today, the close of business, the comment periods will have closed not only on the EIR process, but also on the rulemaking process and on the Delta Plan process. So in essence, we had three processes that will ultimately be coming to a head. The ultimate vote will be by the council adopting the Delta Plan once it's certified, the final EIR, and adopting the associated regulations. And the associated regulations are obviously the regulations that you good people commented on here. So what do we do next? We've got a whole slew of comment letters. I think Mr. Knopp do you have numbers?
Yes.
That Mr. Knopp's going to fill us in on the numbers that we have to date. But as staff, what we do now is we have to go back and review all the comment letters and prepare draft responses to the comment letters. So during the EIR process, responses to the EIR comments have to be included in what's called a final EIR. And the comments that we have received in the rulemaking package have to be responded to in what's called a final statement of reasons for the rulemaking package. So as staff, we have to sort through all those comments. We have to prepare our suggested responses to those comments, and the plan is this. We're now at the end of January. This will take some time to sift through, and what we've told the council is that we intend to come back to them as staff at their end of March meeting, and I believe that's March 28th, 29th, and present, and this will be a very important meeting. This will be a meeting where we will present not only on the EIR, but on the rulemaking, and they'll basically be segmented, so it'll be first, what have we learned through the EIR process? You'll recall we put out an original EIR, a recirculated EIR. We got a whole bunch of comments. We will inform the council as staff what we think we have learned through the EIR process with suggested changes either to the EIR or to the Delta Plan and associated rules. We'll next move to the rulemaking package, and we'll basically say the same thing to the council as staff. We'll say, this is what we think we have learned through the rulemaking process. And if we have suggested changes to the rules, we'll bring those to your attention. Similarly with the Delta Plan process, so we've gotten comments, they're kind of crossover comments for the most part with regard to the rulemaking and the Delta Plan process. But if we got comments that we think are worthy of your deliberation, further discussion, and that might necessitate changes in the Delta Plan or the rules, we'll bring those to your attention. And at that March meeting, what we'll be looking for is direction from the council as to making any necessary changes to move the process to the final stage. The final stage could be, and we're not there yet because we haven't gone through all the comment letters, but if it looks like, as staff, we recommend certain changes to the rulemaking package, to the regulations themselves, the council agrees with that and directs us to make those changes. In all likelihood, that will necessitate floating those again with the public for another 15-day period and taking public comments on the revisions to the rulemaking package. That would if that were to happen, that would likely take place April, during the April period. The ultimate goal is to have final direction from the council, final documents that we can present to you, and the order of adoption would be to certify the final EIR ahead of taking a vote on the Delta Plan and its associated regulations. Once you've adopted the Delta Plan and the associated regulations, we would then take the regulatory package, ship it over to the Office of Administrative Law for its approval. And as many of the speakers have noted here, and as we've talked about before, they have certain standards of review. They'll have 30 days to review the package. Ultimately, those regulations will take legal effect, and the covered action consistency certification process with the potential appeals will then kick into gear. So the next step, again, for us as staff is to sift through the pretty significant amount of comments that we've received. But really, at the end of March, that'll be the big meeting when we will present to the council, again, the comments that we think rise to the level of council, the need for council further deliberation, discussion, and final direction. And what we've got, I'll give you an example. We've now gone through over 2 years of deliberations. We've heard a lot of arguments that we're now familiar with, and we'll get a lot of comments along those same lines. But what we anticipate as staff is bringing to you comments that rise to the level of new information or a new way of looking at things or a new approach for direction to take the process forward. So with that, I think Chris wants to give you
Mr. Knopp, what can you tell us about the volume of comments so far?
Well, the comments, so we've got about 190 separate comments, and it's still counting. We'll expect some more today, obviously. And they're broken out, let's see, into letters of about 120 letters. The number of comments addressing the Delta Plan were about 580.
So when you say that, 580 comments contained within those?
Within those letters,
okay.
Yes. The number of comments within those letters on the recirculated draft EIR were about 660, and the number of comments addressing the rulemaking package were around 380. And so we expect those to change, but that gives you a pretty good idea of the breakdown.
Don.
Yeah, a question either for either Chris, but in the hearing we had a couple of weeks ago, there was some additional information presented regarding the cost analysis, and some has been comments today. I trust some of the correspondence, which I have not read of all of that, but have addressed that. What is the process for addressing questions that relates to that, and if there is decision by staff respectively that there needs to be additional work done, how is that bundled up into the other process? I mean, it's part of, but it's a critical piece in my view, and I think obviously it's there for a reason. And I've heard some things today, heard previously. So where does that fit in all this?
That's a good question, and we presented at the previous hearing, and it wasn't new information, but again we have a regulatory package obviously on the street right now. And the idea was to present some clarifying background discussion about what the documents, the regulatory, economic, fiscal, and impact statement actually mean, where the numbers were derived from, that sort of thing. But the question that you ask has to go with revision of the regulatory process potentially, of the package potentially. And so it's not only the the regulations themselves, but you heard some of the speakers here today testify that they had issues with some of the cost estimates or some of the methodologies. And again, with regard to the fiscal and economic impact analysis, that ultimately has to be signed off by the Department of Finance, the State Department of Finance, before it goes over to the Office of Administrative Law. So all of the methodologies used, all of the information there has to pass muster with Department of Finance. So again, we've said that before, but let's reiterate that when staff prepared the information, the methodologies were, at least in the professional judgment of the people that prepared it, were methodologies that are standardized, that are reasonable under the circumstances. Obviously, you have to look at the circumstances. But in any event, Department of Finance is involved and will be involved. With regard to changes, if we determine that some of the comments are worthy of bringing to your attention at the March meeting, some changes that we think are necessitated in the cost impact analysis, those again would be changes just like changes to the actual regulatory language. So we might say, yeah, there needs to be a tweak with regard to some area of the fiscal impact statement. We received 3 comment letters to this effect. We've taken a second look at that, and we think that's probably the better approach. And then we would ask for your direction to go ahead and make that change. And then that would all be bundled up in the final rulemaking package. It would be sent over to Department of Finance for their sign-off. And ultimately, the entire package goes over to Office of Administrative Law. So changes can be made not only to the fiscal impact statement, but to the statement of reasons, the surrounding justification. We heard some comments here about the statement of reasons, as well as the regulatory language itself, and that may be the case.
Okay. Just one follow-on. Thank you for that, Chris. I know that at the January 11th hearing, certainly Dan Ray and our staff, put forward some additional explanation behind some of the cost analysis, how it might apply in given circumstances. But I still have this lingering question in my mind, even based upon some testimony today about the application in a more rural setting, in islands that are in areas that we don't have heavy population, centers that might be the basis for local match for doing certain levee upgrades, and the whole analysis around the 200-year and where it might apply, and whether that, I guess a piece of that, whether that may interfere with the ability to actually do some of the maintenance, even though that's excluded because of some of the implications of having to do some of those threshold workups relative to what the plan puts forward. And so, again, I don't expect that today this is a public hearing for the public, but I would. That's one of those things I think it needs to be very clear, not just maybe in the presentation on the 11th. I don't know how that documentation got transmitted beyond that hearing that day, and I brought the summary with me today. But I think that that's going to be important, certainly in the minds of a number of folks that spoke here today, and obviously long term in areas in some of the more rural areas or less populated areas of the Delta that rely just as much on those levees as do the population centers and other things that are protected by the levees. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Ms. Gray.
Yeah. Well, first I wanted to thank the public for coming out again. Today, is it on?
It is on, I think.
First, I wanted to thank everyone for coming out today to make comment. And, we certainly understand how important the plan and the process is, to not only the council, but to everyone. But I did have a question to Chris regarding the process. I know you kind of explained the fact that in March, thank you, Randy, in March, it will be very important to the council because we will look at whatever suggested recommendations that staff would make based on the comments that we've received from the public. And you talked about new information or new approaches, so I assume what you would be looking at, anything that's different than what was presented before. Is that correct?
That's in essence what we intend to do.
Okay.
Right. I was just going to say another important point is now that the comment period will have closed, as staff, what we will endeavor to do in the next week or so is to actually post all the comment letters on the website so people can see what all the EIR comments are on the recirculated draft, what all the the rulemaking comments are and the Delta Plan comments. And they're going to be numerous, but as you know, a lot of the comments are going to be issues that we've heard before. And so what we'll try to do, and I think that was your question, is really get to the things that we think are new, different approaches.
And I know we've heard at the different hearings, certainly last week or last month, the last one, and this one that talks about duplicate information and cost analysis and clarity and so forth. If, in fact, there is a significant change that the council makes at that March 28th or 29th meeting, you talked about it would require going out again for public comment, correct? And that would be a 15-day process. Is that correct?
That's right, if it's reasonably related to the regulation that you have before you. So if, for instance, however, not saying this would happen, but if you decided you wanted a regulation that wasn't related to anything there, that would necessitate a new 45-day comment period. But I'm anticipating that these will be refinements, if at all, on the language that we have and that you've debated now for many months.
Did you say 45 days or 15 days?
50, this will likely necessitate, if you decide to make changes that are reasonably related to the regulations.
15 days.
15 days.
Not 45 days. And then after that, it would be, I guess I'm trying to get within the timeline. I know the council has discussed kind of a timeline for closure. Is all that part of the timeline that the council has discussed or from staff that you've given us in terms of final adoption?
I believe that's correct.
Right. I know there's been some talk about the council's role and authority and so forth. So all those comments will come back to us in March in terms of any recommended changes from staff, correct?
I think, yeah, and we'll talk about some of the big issues are, I think, worthy of reiterating, and I'm not intending here to respond to any comments, but you've heard some of the testifiers, and you've seen probably some of the comment letters to date, but a lot of them go to the authority of the council to actually adopt enforceable regulations in general and even more specific policy by policy, regulation by regulation. And I think that part of our presentation on March will be, as staff, to engage with the council and to take a fresh look again at the underlying enabling statute and why this council was established and what the legislature and the governor had intended. There was some comments here about legislative intent, but ultimately it goes back to what Mr. Eisenberg always refers to as his goldenrod Bible here, and it's the Delta Reform Act. So, again, we'll start with the Delta Reform Act, but in essence, we're going to talk about new issues the staff thinks you as the council should engage in and give us final direction to get you to the point where you need to take a vote and adopt the plan and the rules.
And from that part, I guess, of the process, are we looking at 2 months after that in terms of potential adoption?
I think we're looking at, was it May? Early May. For adoption.
For consideration of adoption.
For consideration,
all right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just add my thanks to you for showing up, and large number of people. We appreciate you coming back and testifying many times and helping us work out this production. We're going to take a 5-minute break before we start up on our regular agenda to allow the court reporter to wind up her activities. Thank you very much, and the hearing on rulemaking is adjourned.